Tonight, President Trump's new move to help key supporters hurt by his trade war with China, inviting farmers to the White House.
We love our farmers, and as you know, the farmers like me.
Rolling out a $12 billion aid package for them, paid for by tariff revenue.
This relief will provide much-needed certainty to farmers, and it'll help them continue their efforts to lower food prices for American families.
President Trump was elected on a promise to lower prices. Today's move, the latest in a series of Trump executive actions aimed at addressing voters' economic anxieties.
We inherited a mess. Democrats caused the affordability problem, and we're the ones that are fixing it.
Okay, so this is absolutely classic Trump, and it shows exactly how his trade policy works or doesn't work. Trump just announced a $12 billion bailout for American farmers, specifically targeting farmers in Iowa and other farm states who are getting crushed by Trump's trade war with China. And at the same time, Trump is throwing Mexico under the bus. He's restricting imports from Mexico. He's blaming Mexico for various problems, and he's leaving Mexican farmers and American consumers to deal with the consequences while he hands out billions to his political supporters in farm country. This is Trump's America First strategy in action. Bail out domestic agriculture with taxpayer money while your own trade policies created the problem in the first place, and stick trade partners like Mexico with the costs. Let me break down what's happening. Trump's trade war with China has been a disaster for American farmers. China used to be a huge buyer of American soybeans and other agricultural products. But when Trump started the trade war, China retaliated by reducing purchases from the US and buying from other countries instead. American farmers lost massive amounts of business, prices crashed, farms went bankrupt, and now Trump is trying to fix the problem he created by handing out $12 billion in bailout money. This video is in paid partnership with Kalshi. Before we get deeper into today's Trump topic, I want to show you something that ties directly into it. My partner Kalshi is the largest legal prediction market in the US, and it lets you trade on real-world events. These are real money markets where you're trading against other people, like a stock market for events. Everything on Kalshi is a simple yes or no contract. If a contract is trading at 45 cents, that means the market thinks there's about a 45% chance of that outcome happening. If it resolves yes, it pays out $1 per contract, so entering at 45 cents more than doubles your money if you're correct. Since today's video is about Trump, I literally checked the Trump-related markets on Kalshi before filming just to see what people are trading on right now. You can build a position, scale in and out, and even earn interest on long-term trades before the market resolves. Kalshi is available in all 50 states, has over 1 million users, and has facilitated billions in trades. If you want to try it, Kalshi is giving you $20 when you trade $100. You can go to my partner link, https://kalshi.com/playersunlimited, and use code playersunlimited when you sign up. Thanks to my partner Kalshi, and now back to the video.
Use the word affordability. It's a Democrat hoax. They're the ones that drove the prices up.
It's one of the top issues, not only in my district, it's across the country.
A view gaining traction among some GOP lawmakers.
President Biden was an inflation machine, so things are better, but they're not well.
And there's growing disagreement among Republicans now over health care, some joining Democrats pushing to extend subsidies for Obamacare. The GOP facing pressure to come up with its own health care alternative.
We have to do something. I think Americans are asking for some help.
Garrett joins us tonight live from the White House. And Garrett, I know you're tracking another headline for us. The president now backing off his earlier comments on releasing video of that second boat strike on those people that survived.
Yeah, Tom, last week the president told reporters he would, quote, certainly release any Pentagon video of that second strike on an alleged drug boat from back in September. But asked about it again today, he deferred the decision to Secretary Hegseth. There have been conflicting accounts between Democrats.
On December 8th, Trump held a White House roundtable with farmers from Iowa and other states, corn growers, soybean farmers, cattle ranchers, and he announced this massive aid package. It's positioned as helping farmers who've been hit by the trade war and by inflation. And farmers are going to take the money because they need it. But a lot of them are also saying, wait, why did we need a bailout in the first place? Because your trade policies created this mess. So Trump is essentially paying farmers to accept the damage his own policies caused. And here's the kicker. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent went on CBS Face the Nation and explained why the bailout is necessary. He said China used our soybean farmers as pawns, that China only bought 2.8 million metric tons of soybeans, way below what they promised. And he called the bailout bridge payments to help farmers until China starts buying again. But think about what that means. Trump started a trade war. China retaliated by reducing purchases. American farmers got crushed. And now American taxpayers are paying $12 billion to compensate farmers for Trump's failed strategy. That's not winning. That's using taxpayer money to paper over a policy disaster. But it gets better or worse depending on your perspective. At the same time, Trump is handing out billions to American farmers. He's cutting off Mexico. Beef imports from Mexico are down sharply, partly because of a parasite issue that's emerged, but also because Trump is pushing restrictions and tariffs that make it harder for Mexican beef to enter the U.S., and instead Trump is trying to increase imports from Argentina. So Trump is actively reducing imports from our neighbor and trading partner Mexico, while American consumers are dealing with record-high beef prices, and this is creating a mess. The U.S. cattle herd is already depleted from drought. We need imports to meet demand. But Trump's policies are reducing imports from Mexico, a reliable supplier, in favor of imports from Argentina, which is much further away and more expensive. So American consumers are paying higher prices for beef. Mexican farmers are losing business. And Trump is blaming meat packers for being anti-competitive instead of acknowledging his trade policies are part of the problem. Now, Iowa farmers are showing mixed reactions to all this. Politically, they support Trump. Iowa is a red state. Farmers vote Republican, but they're frustrated by the volatile tariffs and trade policies. They remember Trump's first term when he handed out over $68 billion in farm aid, including COVID relief. And they're wondering why we keep needing these bailouts. Why can't we just have stable trade policy that doesn't require constant government intervention? But they're taking the money anyway, because farms need cash to survive. And here's the political calculation Trump is making. Iowa and other farm states are crucial for Republicans in 2026 midterms. If farmers are angry at Trump because the trade war destroyed their markets, they might not turn out to vote. They might vote Democrat. So Trump is buying their loyalty with $12 billion in taxpayer money. It's a political bailout as much as an economic one. Trump is using federal funds to shore up support in states Republicans need to win. But what about Mexico? What about American consumers paying higher beef prices? Trump doesn't care. Mexico is convenient to blame for immigration and drugs and trade imbalances. And consumers, well, Trump has said inflation and affordability concerns are a Democratic hoax. So Trump's strategy is bail out his political base in farm states with billions in aid, while throwing trade partners and consumers under the bus, and call it America first. Over the next 20 minutes, we're going to break down exactly how Trump's trade war created this mess. We're going to look at why farmers are frustrated even as they take the bailout money. We're going to talk about how Trump is damaging relationships with Mexico while claiming he's protecting American interests. And we're going to figure out what it means when trade policy is driven by politics rather than economics. Let's get into it. Alright, so let's dig into how we got here and why Trump's approach to trade and agriculture is so problematic. Because this isn't just about one bailout. This is about a pattern where Trump creates problems with bad policy and then uses taxpayer money to fix the problems while claiming victory. So let's start with the China trade war. Trump has been obsessed with China since his first term. He thinks China has been ripping off America through unfair trade practices, and he's used tariffs as his weapon of choice. He's imposed tariffs on hundreds of billions of dollars worth of Chinese goods, and China has retaliated with tariffs on American products, including agricultural products. That's basic trade war dynamics. You hit me, I hit you back. And American farmers got caught in the crossfire. China used to be one of the biggest markets for American soybeans. Before the trade war, China was buying massive quantities, but when Trump imposed tariffs, China retaliated by buying soybeans from Brazil and other countries instead of the U.S. American soybean farmers saw their market collapse, prices crashed, many farms couldn't make money, and the problems cascaded through agricultural sectors. During Trump's first term, he responded with farm bailouts. He handed out tens of billions of dollars to compensate farmers for losses from the trade war. It became an annual ritual. Trump would announce new tariffs. China would retaliate. Farmers would complain. And Trump would announce another bailout. Over the course of his first term, Trump's agriculture bailouts totaled over $68 billion when you include COVID relief funds that also went to farms. And now in his second term, Trump is doing the exact same thing. The trade war never really ended. Trump kept tariffs in place. China never fully restored purchases. And now farmers are still struggling. So Trump announced this new $12 billion package on December 8th. He held a roundtable at the White House with farmers from Iowa and other states, soybean growers, corn farmers, cattle ranchers, and he promised them aid to offset trade war losses and inflation impacts. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent tried to justify this on Face the Nation. He said China used American soybean farmers as pawns, that China only bought 2.8 million metric tons of soybeans this year, which is way below what they'd bought before the trade war. And Bessent called the $12 billion bridge payments temporary aid until China starts buying again. But here's the problem. Those bridge payments are coming from American taxpayers, so taxpayers are subsidizing Trump's failed trade strategy. and there's no indication China is going to start buying American soybeans at pre-trade war levels anytime soon. China has found other suppliers, they've built relationships with Brazilian farmers, they've diversified their supply chains, so even if Trump wanted to end the trade war, China might not come back to buying American agricultural products at previous levels, which means American farmers are permanently dependent on government bailouts to make up for lost markets. That's not sustainable, that's not winning. Now let's talk about the Mexico angle, because that's where this gets even more hypocritical. While Trump is handing out billions to American farmers, he's also restricting trade with Mexico. Beef imports from Mexico are down sharply. There are several reasons for this. One is a parasite issue. Apparently there's been a resurgence of a cattle parasite that's affecting Mexican beef. But Trump's administration is also using this as an excuse to restrict imports through additional inspections and regulations. And Trump is pushing for increased imports from Argentina instead of Mexico. Now, Argentina has quality beef, but it's also much further away geographically. Shipping costs are higher, the supply chain is longer, and Argentina is more politically unstable than Mexico. So Trump is replacing a reliable close neighbor as a beef supplier with a more expensive and less reliable distant supplier. Why? Partly because Trump has been attacking Mexico over immigration and drugs, and he wants to apply pressure. And partly because Trump just doesn't seem to care about supply chain efficiency or consumer prices. The result is American consumers are paying record high beef prices. The U.S. cattle herd is depleted from years of drought. We don't produce enough beef domestically to meet demand. We need imports, but Trump's reducing imports from Mexico while beef prices are already sky high. And instead of acknowledging his trade policies are part of the problem, Trump is blaming meat packers. He's claiming they're engaged in anti-competitive practices and gouging consumers, which might be partly true, but Trump's trade restrictions are definitely making the problem worse, and Mexico is getting screwed in all this. Mexican cattle ranchers are losing access to the U.S. market. Mexican farmers who export to the U.S. are facing more barriers, and Trump is doing this while he's also demanding Mexico do more on immigration enforcement and fentanyl interdiction. So Trump wants Mexico to help him on his priorities, but he's not willing to help Mexico by maintaining open trade. That's not how partnerships work. That's not how you build good relationships with your neighbors. Now let's talk about the political dynamics in farm states like Iowa. Because Iowa farmers are in a really interesting position. They support Trump politically. Iowa went for Trump in 2016 and 2020 and 24. Farmers in Iowa are generally conservative and Republican. They like Trump's rhetoric about putting America first and fighting China. But they're also directly harmed by Trump's trade policies. They're the ones losing Chinese markets. They're the ones dealing with volatile commodity prices, and they're the ones depending on government bailouts. So you've got this tension where Iowa farmers politically support Trump, but economically they're victims of his policies, and their reaction to the $12 billion bailout reflects that tension. They're taking the money because they need it. Farms are businesses, and if the government is offering aid, you take it. But they're also frustrated. They're saying we'd rather have stable markets than government bailouts. They want to sell their products to willing buyers, not depend on taxpayer subsidies. And they remember Trump promised great trade deals that would benefit farmers, but instead they got trade wars and bailouts. Facebook posts from Iowa news outlets show this mixed sentiment. Farmers saying things like, "I support Trump, but I wish we didn't need bailouts," or "I'll take the money, but this isn't sustainable." That's dangerous for Trump politically, because if farmers start to feel like Trump's policies are failing them, they might not turn out to vote in 2026, or they might vote for Democrats who promise more stable trade policy. Farm states are crucial for Republican control of the Senate. If Trump loses support there, GOP majority is at risk, and Trump seems to understand this, which is why he keeps handing out bailouts. This $12 billion package is political protection. It's buying loyalty from a key constituency. It's making sure farmers have cash in their pockets heading into 2026 so they don't abandon Trump and Republicans. But it's also expensive. That's $12 billion in taxpayer money being used to compensate for failed trade policy. And it sets a precedent that every time Trump's trade wars create problems, he'll just bail out affected industries with federal funds. That's not fiscal conservatism. That's not limited government. That's using taxpayer money to paper over policy failures. And this highlights a fundamental problem with Trump's approach to trade. Trade policy should be based on economics and national interest. What creates good jobs? What gives consumers access to affordable products? What strengthens American competitiveness? But Trump's trade policy is driven by politics and personal grudges. He doesn't like China, so he starts a trade war. He wants to pressure Mexico, so he restricts imports. And when those policies create problems, he uses bailouts to protect his political base, while leaving everyone else to deal with higher prices and disrupted supply chains. The Mexico situation is particularly frustrating because USMCA, the trade deal Trump himself negotiated, was supposed to create more integrated North American supply chains. Mexico was supposed to be a partner, but Trump treats Mexico as an adversary. He blames Mexico for immigration. He demands Mexico pay for border enforcement. He restricts trade to apply pressure. That's not how you treat a partner, and it damages relationships that are economically important for the United States. So we've got American farmers dependent on government bailouts because Trump's trade war destroyed their Chinese markets. We've got American consumers paying record beef prices because Trump's restricting Mexican imports. We've got Mexico being undermined as a trading partner. And we've got Trump claiming all of this is winning. That's not winning. That's chaos masked by taxpayer-funded bailouts. Okay, so let's break down what this all means for trade policy, for Trump's political standing, and for the 2026 midterms. Because Trump's approach to agriculture and trade is creating real economic damage while he tries to buy political loyalty with bailouts. Here's point 1. Trump's trade policy is fundamentally broken because it creates more problems than it solves. The theory behind Trump's tariffs is that they'll force other countries to make concessions and give America better deals. But that's not what's happened. China didn't fold. They found other suppliers for soybeans. They built trade relationships with countries that aren't in trade wars with them, and American farmers permanently lost market share. So Trump's tariffs didn't achieve their goal, and they created lasting damage to American agriculture. And now Trump's solution is just to keep paying farmers with taxpayer money. That's not a solution. That's just transferring the costs of failed policy from farmers to taxpayers, and it's unsustainable. You can't run annual multi-billion-dollar bailouts forever. Eventually, either the bailouts end and farmers go bankrupt, or the bailouts continue and taxpayers revolt at the cost. There's no good long-term outcome here. What Trump should do is end the trade war, negotiate a real deal with China that restores market access for American farmers, remove the tariffs that are hurting both countries. But Trump can't do that because he's committed to his tough on China brand. He's painted himself into a corner where backing down looks like weakness. So instead, he's stuck in a permanent state of trade war plus bailouts, and that's terrible policy. Point 2. The Mexico situation shows how Trump prioritizes politics over economics and relationships. Mexico is America's neighbor and a crucial trading partner. We share a border. We have integrated supply chains. Mexican consumers buy American products. American consumers buy Mexican products. It's mutually beneficial, but Trump treats Mexico as an adversary to be pressured, rather than as a partner to be cultivated. And this beef import situation is a perfect example. America needs imported beef. Our herd is depleted. Prices are sky high. Mexico is a close, reliable supplier. But Trump is restricting Mexican imports partly for legitimate health reasons, but also partly as political leverage on immigration and drugs. And he's trying to replace Mexican imports with Argentine imports, which are more expensive and less reliable. That makes no economic sense. It's pure politics. And it's damaging long-term relationships with Mexico. The Mexican government and Mexican businesses are noticing that Trump will use trade as a weapon whenever he wants to pressure Mexico on other issues. That makes them less willing to integrate with American supply chains, less willing to invest in cross-border production, less trusting of American commitments, and that's bad for both countries' economies. Point 3. The bailout strategy might work politically in the short term, but it creates long-term vulnerabilities. In the short term, Trump is buying loyalty from Iowa farmers and other agricultural constituencies. They're getting checks from the government. Their balance sheets look better. They're more likely to turn out and vote Republican in 2026. So politically, this might help Trump and the GOP. But long term, this creates dependency and resentment. Farmers don't want to be dependent on government bailouts. They want to run profitable businesses based on market sales. And the more dependent they become on government aid, the more vulnerable they are to policy changes. What happens if Democrats win and decide farm bailouts are too expensive? What happens if Republicans decide fiscal conservatism matters and cut the bailouts? Farmers who've become dependent on that money are screwed, and there's resentment building even among farmers who support Trump. They're taking the money, but they're saying this isn't what we voted for. We voted for great trade deals and winning. Instead, we got trade wars and bailouts. That resentment could grow if things don't improve. And if it grows enough, farmers might decide they'd rather have competent trade policy than more bailouts, and they might vote accordingly. Democrats are definitely going to try to exploit this. They're going to run on stable trade policy that doesn't require massive bailouts. They're going to say Trump's trade wars destroyed agricultural markets and forced taxpayer-funded rescues. They're going to argue they can negotiate better deals that actually benefit farmers instead of hurting them. And in farm states, that message might work, especially if farmers are frustrated with the volatility of Trump's approach. Now let's talk about consumer politics, because that matters too. American consumers are dealing with really high food prices. Beef prices are at records. Grocery bills are up across the board, and voters blame the president when their cost of living increases. Trump has tried to dismiss inflation concerns as a Democratic hoax, but people know what they're paying at the grocery store, and when beef prices are high, partly because Trump restricted Mexican imports, voters are going to be unhappy. And Democrats can draw a direct line from Trump's trade policies to higher prices. They can say Trump's tariffs and import restrictions are making your food more expensive, and they can promise to restore normal trade relationships that will bring prices down. That's a winning message with suburban swing voters who are price sensitive. So Trump's farm bailout might help him in Iowa, but it might hurt him in suburbs where voters care more about grocery prices than about farm income. That's a tricky political calculation, and it shows how Trump's coalition is fragile. He's trying to help one group, but that help comes at the expense of other groups, and balancing those interests is really difficult. Now here's the big picture problem. Trump's whole approach to trade is transactional and political rather than strategic and economic. He uses tariffs and trade restrictions as leverage to achieve political goals. He hands out bailouts to protect his political base. But he doesn't have a coherent long-term vision for what American trade policy should look like. He's just reacting to immediate political pressures, and that creates chaos, uncertainty for businesses, volatility for farmers, higher prices for consumers, damaged relationships with trading partners. None of that is good for long-term economic growth or American competitiveness. What we need is stable, predictable trade policy based on economic analysis and strategic goals. But what we have is Trump using trade as a political weapon and then using taxpayer money to clean up the mess. So where does this leave us? Trump announced a $12 billion farm bailout to compensate farmers for losses from his trade war with China and his broader trade policies. At the same time, he's restricting imports from Mexico and pushing Argentine beef instead, which is making American beef prices even higher. Iowa farmers are taking the money, but they're frustrated by the volatility. Mexico is getting undermined as a trading partner. American consumers are paying more, and Trump is using taxpayer funds to buy political loyalty from farm states heading into 2026. This is unsustainable. You can't run permanent trade wars plus annual multi-billion-dollar bailouts. Eventually something breaks. Either the bailouts end and farmers collapse, or the bailouts continue and fiscal conservatives revolt, or voters decide they'd rather have competent trade policy that doesn't require bailouts. Any of those outcomes is bad for Trump and Republicans. And the Mexico angle makes it worse, because Trump is damaging relationships with a crucial neighbor and trading partner for short-term political gain. That's going to have long-term costs. Mexican businesses will diversify away from American markets. Mexican consumers will buy from other countries, and America will lose access and influence in a country that should be a natural partner. Trump calls this America first, but it's really Trump first. It's using trade policy to serve Trump's political needs regardless of economic consequences, and it's using taxpayer money to paper over the damage. That's not leadership, that's not winning, that's creating problems, forcing taxpayers to pay for them, and calling it a success. And eventually voters are going to see through it. Pay attention to farm state politics in 2026. Because if farmers decide they're done with trade war plus bailout approach, that could flip some crucial Senate seats, and Trump's whole trade policy house of cards could collapse.